Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope you've had a great week. I'd like to continue my series of videos just exploring what were my favorite reading experiences in 2021. And this video is just going to focus on rereads. They're all novels. They're all novels that I reread and absolutely enjoyed rereading last year. And as I was pulling these out and stacking them up, I started reflecting on, why does a person reread? Why do I reread? And I think there's a couple of reasons. There's this sense of returning to something that is familiar. And there might be a couple of reasons we return to something that's familiar. It might be that life feels chaotic, and so it's nice to have the pieces of life that we can control and sort of know what to anticipate when we don't know what's around the corner. It's personally, I think that's why young children like hearing the same stories over and over and over, is it feels like they have a little bit of control over the story because they know how it ends. I think it's why we see adolescents. I teach high school, so I spend a lot of time with adolescents. We see adolescents who enjoy rereading the same book over and over and over and over. And I know I did that when I was younger, both fiction and nonfiction. And I think it's because life feels so out of control, like your biochemistry feels so out of control, that it's nice to have this one piece that you do feel in control of. And I know that was certainly true for me with at least one of these books this year. So there's that sense of what's familiar. I think sometimes it's sharing the experience. You know, we enjoy sharing things we love with people, with our friends, with our family. And so it might be going and rereading a book with someone who's never experienced it, sort of as a way to share that with them and enjoy, both recapture our own sense of joy from when we first experienced the book, but also to share in that, moment with someone else and to be their companion through that journey. And then I suppose there's sort of the let me have another shot at it sense of rereading, going back to something that felt really challenging, that felt difficult, obscure, and suddenly feeling more prepared for it. It's a little bit like going and trying to climb a mountain, and you don't make it up the first time, but you come back, you've trained, you're a little more prepared. Maybe you have gloves this time, maybe you brought more water, you're ready, and you're gonna try and ascend it again. And so there's that sense of trying to reread a book that maybe you finished but didn't really feel like you had to grasp of. So there's a lot of reasons to reread. I just really enjoyed rereading each of these books, and there are plenty of other reasons to reread as well. But let's dive in. So these are just roughly chronological across the year. Up first, I have Kane by Jean Toomer. This is a masterpiece. It is a really, really wonderful book. It is a frightening book because it examines, the realities of racism in the U.S. and not just in the sort of Jim Crow U.S., the former slave states, but the realities across the board. But it is incredibly written. It feels like a book that's written, in lightning or something. The way Toomer structures and combines poems, what feel like, and almost more like modernist poems, what feel like songs or ballads, and then quick sketches and vignettes along with full stories and story cycles really work in Kane. It is an amazing book. I cannot recommend reading this book highly enough, or rereading the book highly enough. I mentioned, of course, that sense of feeling totally discombobulated by life and wanting something familiar. So when I had found out that the school I'd worked at the past 4 years was going to be closing because of some enrollment shifts in the district, and I was going to need to work at a new school and all that would entail. And thankfully everything went well, but it really threw me for a loop, and I just kind of stopped everything I had been reading and pulled out Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. And yes, this is a difficult book, but it's a wonderful book. And it's not necessarily a happy book. It doesn't feel like the type of book a person should grab when life feels like it's kind of crushing and uncomfortable, But the Woolf's writing is so wonderful that it was a pleasure to just dive back into this. And maybe there was that sense of kind of returning to the mountain 10 years later and having a crack at it, because as much as I had thought I had enjoyed the book, I enjoyed it so much more this past March when I reread it. March of the Moderns with Margaret Pinard. Let's see, what else? Oh, so a couple of those books where I had mentioned that idea of wanting to share the book with somebody else. I did do that with several of these books. First, of course, was rereading The Historian with my wife, and we had a lot of fun. We do this every year where we read a book, at least one, and talk about it as we read it. But we did film our discussion for The Historian, and we just had a lot of fun discussing it over a week and a half and then kind of putting together that 30-minute discussion that we filmed. This is a book that I know there are people who don't enjoy this book, it holds a special place for both of us. And it's one that I will always love returning to. I look forward to reading it with our daughters at some point, I'm sure. And on that note, I'm going to include Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. I have the old tiny little pocket illustrated classics edition that has the fun illustrations. I loved these when I was a kid, and we, the girls and I, read Treasure Island over a series of nights, reading 1 or 2 chapters a night. This was great fun. And you know, who doesn't want to be a sort of pirate at times, right? Not the real kind, though. They were terrifying. In terms of sharing books with, you know, other people who aren't in my family, I had talked about books that I consider to be like perfect novels that aren't even the best novel that person wrote. And one of those was The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. You can try and guess which ones I think might even be better than The Left Hand of Darkness, which is an amazing book. But a group of us, Noah, Elizabeth from the Bookish North, Yasmin from To the Lit House, the 4 of us, I was rereading, and I think a couple of other people were rereading it. And it was so fun to have that discussion, to get back into what makes Le Guin's writing so special. Her sense of science fiction, her sense of anthropology, her sense of myth and narrative and tale, her sense of science itself, and how she combines all of that in really interesting and fascinating ways. And just fantastic. Along with that, I reread The Kingdom of This World by Alejo Carpentier. Love this book. The Marvelous Real, you know, a precursor to what so many people would later refer to as the magical realism from various writers in South and Central America. But this book is sort of phantasmagoria. It is wild, it is horrifying, and it moves with such a fast pace as a book. It's a short book that just never stops. Every page, every passage, every sentence just feels like it is propelling the reader forward, propelling this book forward. It's wonderful. I reread Home by Toni Morrison. This was interesting because this was a book I read before I had read, sort of as it came out, before I was reading all of Toni Morrison's works. And so to reread it, having a better grasp of the arc of her writing career, it was interesting. As I've kind of started reading Sula this week, I even see, you know, there were parts of and I feel this is true about a number of Toni Morrison's final novels, is that they seem to almost be distillations of earlier works she was exploring. I really think A Mercy feels like this attempt to distill key ideas from Beloved and put them in, encapsulate them in this shorter book. And Home feels like it's doing that with elements of Song of Solomon, but especially Sula, as I've started that seems to be informing what she was doing with Home as well. As part of the Euro Cup reading, I returned to one of my all-time favorite living writers, David Peace, and The Damned United. This book is, it rips. We are with a singular narrator in Brian Clough, who is leading his nemesis team in a sort of dream job that is really a nightmare job. And he is obsessive, he is furious, he is angry at the world, he is angry at himself. And it is unrelenting. It is a brutal book to read. It is a brutal narrator to spend time with. But there are moments where, you know, when we know what ultimately happens, what a disaster this book chronicles, but the successes he would later have, it's so fascinating to read that and to see how relentless the book feels, yet with this sense of genuine optimism based on what really happened. A lot of people were just talking about The World of Worlds last year, and so I pulled out my copy. I love H.G. Wells. I first read the book in one of those illustrated classics editions along with The Time Machine, so this was a lot of fun to return to. And I had forgotten elements of you know, there are the aspects when we read a book, there are the plot points we remember, or the characters we remember, or certain lines or passages or scenes that we remember that are etched in our memories. And then there are the elements that surprise us that we've forgotten. And that's part of the fun, I think, of rereading. And that was true for War of the Worlds for me. Another one that was sort of shared with people was rereading Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. This was my first time reading it in the Pevera Volkanovsky translation, which I really enjoyed. And this book is, again, this is a really wild book. This is a book that's a mess. It's all over the place. And yet it feels like it is poking at just about everything Bulgakov possibly could within his society, within, you know, his literary traditions. It feels like he's trying to have fun, as much fun as he can, living in a totalitarian regime, knowing that no one's going to see this novel until years after he is no longer around to enjoy any accolades it receives, and yet still pouring his passion into it. This is a fantastic book. Again, one I could not encourage everyone to read or reread highly enough. The Ice Shirt from William T. Vollmann, kind of finally got a copy of The Dying Grass. And so I thought, well, why not? And Fathers and Crows. I was like, why not just restart and start with The Ice Shirt and then hit Fathers and Crows and reread Argyle? That'll probably be in this type of video for 2023 when I start reflecting on 2022. But The Ice Shirt's great. This one, I think, is the book Vollmann wrote that feels the most focused on the European side of what happened when Europeans started interacting with the indigenous peoples living in the Americas, and the positive moments that existed there, but the many, many, many negative interactions and negative ramifications that occurred. But this book, I think, has a little bit more travelogue of Vollmann inserting himself into the book. It has an incredible set piece, though, where we are traveling with a character through icy wastes to climb a mountain, and what feels either supernatural or a hallucination or something incredible is going on, and it is told beautifully within this book. That's the set piece I always remember with and associate with Vollmann. And then finally, right at the end of the year in December, I returned to Agatha Christie and the Great Murder of Roger Ackroyd. It's a wonderful little mystery. It's an early Hercule Poirot mystery, and one that has one of those signature Christie twists, is all I'll say. Don't look for spoilers. Just enjoy the book if you've never read it, and then some years later, go back and reread it. Even when you know the twist, it's fun to go back and reread it and look for where you've been given the little clues, where are the little crumbs that will tell you what's coming. So these were my favorite rereads from 2021. Share some of yours with me, and sometime later I'll be talking about the favorite books that I read for the very first time, my first interaction, my new friends that I get to return to in future years. So again, I hope everybody's doing well. Have a great weekend. Thanks.